Hi, Chris.
Hello. How are you?
I'm great, buddy. Woohoo! Cheers.
Cheers.
So, what are we doing?
We are talking about qi, the nature of qi, how it influences traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, martial arts. Yeah. Did I miss anything?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things. I would like to...
This is a bad start then.
That's a great start. Qi is kind of at the foundation of all of it because it says somewhere, I've heard somewhere, and it was kind of a mind-blowing statement. And it is for someone like you or I who's into Chinese martial arts and Chinese philosophy and Taoism and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or Chinese medicine, to say that everything is qi, even the Tao. So you would think that nothing categorically precedes the Tao, but this isn't true.
According to the tradition, yes, that qi becomes, in a way, the fundamental aspect of the universe, the ground of the universe, or that which the universe and everything else is made of. But before we get into that,
oh man,
yes, I think we need to take a step back, because one of the problems that we all have is that we start talking about qi, but we never say what exactly qi is.
Oh.
And I think unless we do that, and then unless we have a context so that we actually understand what we're saying, none of that makes sense. Like even the statement, qi precedes the Tao. Is like, well, what the fuck is the qi?
Well,
what do we mean by qi? That's really one of the questions, right? And because my concern always is that we can't isolate some of these ideas and just go, well, they're Chinese and they're therefore different, or Eastern, so they're separated from kind of our Western experience. They're separated from our Western understanding of the universe and how physics works and all that.
This is a particular interest of yours, which I greatly appreciate.
And it's also because otherwise the entire concept cannot be understood or cannot be bioavailable. Like it can't. It's an idea that can't be useful to us until we've processed it enough that it actually resonates. That there's something there that we can go, okay, this is, you can kind of hang your hat on it and go, okay, this is something that I can actually use or understand without making that leap of just going, well, there is no understanding. It's this mysterious Eastern concept and you just have to accept it on faith. That's not how a Chinese doctor would use qi. They don't go, oh, well, I don't know what it is, but I'll just use it in my acupuncture. They have a very solid definition and understanding of what it is and how it works. So we're kind of prevented from having that understanding because culturally we're not from the same place, right? So there's a cultural block there, and also I think it's worth asking that question. And what exactly, when we talk about qi, what does it mean? Is it the same qi when we talk about the qi that precedes the Tao as when we talk about qi in a martial art context or qi in an acupuncture context?
Let's extract what we mean when we say something like qi. To say that qi precedes the Tao means that somehow even the Tao is made of qi.
Yes.
What are we saying when we say that? We're saying that qi is that fundamental.
Yeah.
It's that much of a foundational substrate of everything. Right. So in this quest to define qi, we might want to wonder whether or not it's the same thing as asking, is it the same thing as mana, prana, orgone,
exactly,
tachyons, monopoles, the ether?
Exactly. We need to kind of define it because I know that, and I think part of it is narrowing down what exactly we're talking about, because I know that essentially qi can have different definition even within a Chinese context, so that an acupuncturist is using qi in a slightly different way than a martial artist would be using qi, or a philosopher would be using qi. They're actually talking about something slightly different, right? So we're talking, because for example in traditional Chinese medicine, qi can be the action of the organs, right? Or like the way that an organ relates to others and the way that it functions, right?
The way that it relates.
right? But in martial arts, that's not the way chi is thought of, because in a way, each category, which each art, medicine or martial or philosophical, is going to use the definition that is useful to its own, to its own practice. So by definition, so it's leaving other definitions. And so I think when we talk about like the chi that precedes the Tao, we're in kind of the philosophical Taoist discussion, like chi as an elemental part of the universe, as one of the functions of the universe, one of the qualities of the universe, as opposed to, for example, in acupuncture, you're talking about chi as not the universal force, but the personal force that is within the body. Now they're related, and they're going to have an echo, but they're not exactly the same thing. Right. So I think that's the first thing is like there is no single chi. Chi is a category of interactions, a category of relationships.
Like all things exist on a continuum, and especially in all spiritual avenues of inquiry, you run into paradox, and that's where things get the most interesting.
Yes.
Which is what Taoism points us at.
Yes.
Taoism points us at the fact that the Tao cannot be told, the name cannot be named.
Yep.
That which is nameless is what's eternally real.
Yeah.
And
that the paradox actually is where the reality actually is in the
Amen.
paradox. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Tell you what. So, where my mind was going as you were talking is the fact that in the way that these things may exist on a continuum, so does chi, in the sense that, for instance, there's an acupuncture point, Sanjiao 4. It's the what's called the source point. So all the points on the channels have a point that's considered the source point of that channel, where that point on the meridian or the channel or the jingmai receives chi, and so it receives source chi. So the sanjiao, or the container for the three burners in the body, somewhat separate from the three dantian. So the three burners are contained here, here, and here, whereas the three dantian are here, here, and here.
Yeah.
So the source point on the organ, the channel for the organ which receives and manages source chi, is kind of a mysterious point. It's one of my favorite points for that reason. But that's a distinction in chi that's made in Chinese medicine. Is there's chi. There's, say, for instance, in Chinese medicine, we've got our 8 extraordinary vessels, which are actually formed from, to a certain extent, from the 12 ordinary channels, but they're prenatal. So you have the 8 extraordinary vessels on your body as a fetus, and then once you take your first breath, you have these 12 channels pop into existence on the body. That's a theory. Who knows? I don't assert any kind of metaphysical reality to any of this, right? That's what makes us Taoist, isn't it? But anyway, that's a gradation in chi that is made. That when you receive the breath, when you take your first breath, you're animating these 12 channels in the body. But there's a form of chi called yuan chi, or source chi. In the same way that there's source aspects to Jing, Qi, and Shen, the substance, the energy, the breath, the spirit of the body, there's source aspects to all those. So all of it exists on a continuum, right? And if the Tao is made of Qi, then all of it's made of Qi. So we can think of Qi as being fundamental, because Qi is also the intermediary, in the same way that man, so to speak, is the intermediary in Tian Ren Di. We have Ren being the man, or intermediary aspect that goes between, the go-between of heaven and earth. So chi is somehow fundamental in that way too. And you alluded to that. Yeah. You just alluded to that as chi being what? At least in your analysis of the Chinese medical
aspect of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's also a fundamental idea, the idea of the three-partite nature of the universe. The fact that there is this connection. There is a need for that connection. The minute heaven and earth separate or even in contact, then that point of contact becomes something new. So there's always something in between, essentially heaven and earth, between the physical and the spiritual in a way, right? So even if they're, even if they're indivisible, even if they're of the same stuff, because I mean this is very much a Taoist idea that mind and body are not separate, spirit and body are not two separate things that with different nature, they're interconnected. And, but then chi becomes the intermediary between those two poles, essentially. Right? The further Shen, the further spiritual you are, and the earth and the body, but they're still connected through chi. So chi becomes this substance which connects, that actually is, and this is why it's exceptional, is because it has aspects of both. It's both grounded in the material and is affected by the spiritual, by the immaterial. So it's this strange middle substance that acts on both.
Well, let me ask you something. Is calling it a substance?
Oh, that's it. Right. That's the big problem.
Right.
Yes.
It can be thought of a substance insofar as it's like it's the establishment of like a resonance. It's the extent to which perhaps 2 points in space, or not even, just anything exists within a field of resonance. There's a term for this called gan ying. Gan ying is a little bit, it translates as cause and effect. So I'm thinking of it in the way that, like, I'm thinking of it as entanglement.
Oh, yeah.
Like we were talking about it last night.
So because then the question becomes, is chi a substance, or is it actually the field that allows the elements within this field to communicate? It's like in the same way that a wave is a movement of the water. So is chi the wave, or is chi the water? Right? So is it the substance, or is it like an electrical field or electricity, or is it the field in which everything plays? But let's go back to this idea.
Both. It's got to be both.
Yeah. So let's go back to the entanglement thing, because I think one of the really important ideas is, and this is in Western physics, right?
Yeah.
Or one of the major crises right now is that since the 70s, basically, there's been no major breakthrough in physics in the West. Basically, physics is stuck. And the latest thing is, dark energy and dark matter and all that kind of stuff. So basically, they've come back to the idea of ether. There's an invisible, right, an invisible substance somehow, but which is actually 90% of the universe, right? So,
and even that is so there's a mathematical fudge factor that is given in the same way that Maxwell and Maxwell's field equations. Maxwell was doing, this is my understanding, Maxwell was doing 4-dimensional geometry, a little bit like Whitehead, like Alfred North Whitehead. Maxwell was doing higher dimensional geometry in order to explicate the mathematics used to determine the properties of any field. This is the guy who came up with the theory of what a field is, what an electromagnetic field is. And so people who do electricians or who work in electronics, they are exposed to this and they have to use Maxwell's equations to do things. Here's the funny thing: they in their parlance they refer to them as Maxwell's equations. They're actually not Maxwell's equations. There's this other English gentleman, this mathematician that came after Maxwell named Heaviside. Heaviside took all of Maxwell's voluminous work on the nature of the field, and he took out these components, this 4-dimensional geometry and mathematics that Maxwell has in his equations, and Heaviside said, chop, 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 slice it down, take off the fat. So now they're applicable to electronics and electricians, and to doing the work of managing and redirecting electricity so that we can be talking on these things. The same thing, right, happens in even quantum mechanics, where they're given a fudge factor
Yeah.
because Planck, the way that Max Planck discovered what a Planck is, this
Planck length or
the Planck length, the Planck constant, the smallest possible measurement of time and space, length, dimension, width, velocity, spin, the highest possible measurement of temperature and speed, somehow simultaneously as this minute thing, which is synonymous with a quanta. That's what a quanta is a
The
quant.
smallest
That's my
possible,
understanding,
yeah.
right? Is the quantum, what we see in quantum physics is the same kind of fudge factor given. So ever since Michelson-Morley and them writing off the existence of the ether and all this kind of stuff, we've moved further away from materialism and yet had quantum mechanics kind of creeping up under here. Yeah. And they consistently, because of both an intellectual paradigm that we've been in for a few hundred years now, as well as ease of trying to make these things applicable. Like they probably wouldn't be colliding protons together the way that they are if they had to contend with the actual ether, with the actual Planck density that we are in, which is an infinite amount of energy. It's an infinite amount of energy.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's this unwillingness to deal with the what really comes out of quantum mechanics, and this is what Whitehead dealt with, like where he said, "Hey, excuse me, none of you are really looking at what this actually means. You're fudging. Like this whole fudge factor is a way to avoid the real consequences of what these theories. That if you truly apply these theories." We would understand the world and the universe in a completely different way. And so the last 100 years, essentially, since quantum mechanics was kind of developed, is essentially a resistance to what quantum mechanics actually is saying, which is why you have all these fudge factors, which is why you have all these things, like the cosmological constant, you do all your equations and then you multiply your results by 1.8, blah, 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 blah. Because there's this slight skewing, and nobody knows why. All they know is that the math works if you apply these fudges, right? And part of it, and what Whitehead was pointing is like all of this is happening because you're stuck with this mechanical view of the universe. So you're changing your mathematics so that your math kind of works, but so that way you don't have to take in the philosophical implications of quantum mechanics, right? And so and that's why physics has been stuck. Because they've been avoiding all the, this entire area of like the implications of quantum mechanics. And you keep having these moments where some physicists stick up their hand and go, hey, look at this. If I do my math this way, I get a completely different result. But the implications are that we're not in this kind of mechanical universe that we still think we are, that we still believe we are, like the work on black holes, right? I actually was an Italian physicist, if I remember correctly, who was the first one to go, hey, if I use 5 dimensions instead of 4 in my equations about black holes, instead of having a singularity, which is basically the moment where math breaks down, where literally math stops making sense. But if you make the same calculations and using a 5-dimensional model, there is no singularity. The math works perfectly, but in 5 dimensions. And so again, nobody goes, holy shit, we're living in a 5-dimensional world. No, they don't. They just go, maybe. Let's stick with, our fudged physics, because it means that you don't have to look at what it really means. And a 5-dimensional world actually solves a lot of problems.
That's really interesting, because the idea of a singularity gives me great peace. So it's not in my at least physical, because neither of us are physicists.
No, we're
philosophers.
Yes.
So in my grappling with these concepts, I don't see a singularity as being terribly different from the Tao. And what you're saying is that, and again, I don't understand the mathematics of it, but we know at least that people like Alfred North Whitehead, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, and Maxwell. There's 4-dimensional mathematics out there, 4-dimensional geometry, and that includes time. Time is this 4th dimension where you take an object and you move it through this dimension. A 3-dimensional object. Well, how does it get from here to here? It's through time.
Through time, yeah.
And the 5th dimension is this ability to, in a sense, I mean, this is how I think of it at least, choose which direction in time. You now have a 3-dimensional object moving from here to here in this span of time. Well, it's not like all of time is only going one linear direction. We do perceive this thing we call free will, Does it really exist on all levels and in all dimensions? I don't know. But so it's not so much the writing off of the singularity, it's what compels me about what you were telling us earlier is that the ability to even mathematically for physicists, in that paper that you're referring to, you showed it to me, it came out in 2008. 2008?
Yeah.
April 8th, as a matter of fact, 2008.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of this is recent. Well, recent. We're not talking about the 1940s or 50s. I mean, it's because physicists have been banging their head against the wall for all this time with no result, because they're not taking into account all the implications. They're not looking at what people like Whitehead have been saying since the 30s. And they're still resisting that idea. Because even in this idea, you were talking about, 5th dimension as being free will, this idea of, moving through time. But I don't know if it's free will as opposed to just will. Like the intent.
Sure.
Intent,
And us, I mean, so what does that feel like when it's expressed with the most, well, I mean, we call it in mathematics and in physics, they call it degrees of freedom. When when you take a system, right? Yeah. Its degrees of freedom determine its ability to the different kinds of outcomes that it can determine for itself.
Yeah.
So,
which was also Whitehead's idea of nodes of action that are related to each other, and that's actually the components of the universe is actually these nodes that that are reacting to each other, both forward and backwards in time and all that. So essentially, will is at the core of the interactions of every element in the universe. So there's an element of will. There's an element. This is where the kind of the animist view of the universe becomes the most correct one. Where everything is alive, everything has a will, has an intent, has a desire towards a specific outcome. But just to hit another point, though, like you were talking about entanglement, right? Physicists right now are still baffled by how entanglement works. Now, again, this is something that was described 100 years ago. That's in the math of quantum mechanics. Two particles that are separated by a distance that are paired, and if you act on one, automatically it acts on the other. And there's
I love to hammer this point because it's not, we're not saying that you jiggle one and the other one goes, oh, I'll jiggle too. It's the same object at two separate points in space. So there's this other quantum property called superposition where they've been able to separate it kind of holographically. Yeah. Kind of like take an object and go, it's the same object. That's entanglement too, right? So there's these overlapping quantum properties like superposition and entanglement. It's the same object, in other words.
And there's no delay in action. If you act on one, automatically. Yeah. So something beyond time is happening, beyond time and space.
And space, very much so.
And the fact that physicists still have no clue how that works, shows that how stuck they are because they're still thinking mechanically.
Where philosophically in our
we've solved this problem.
We know it all.
Exactly. We have solved the problem already. No, but you see, this is where if you look,
it's actually entirely intuitive to the essence of human rationality with the world.
Absolutely.
You're talking about this animist perspective, and somehow simultaneously, again, not only the animist perspective of everything being a manifestation of its own will to exist, but at the same time, there's a monad when you drill down far enough. So it's not, last night we were talking about kind of like, is it a monotheist interpretation of what's going on? And like, that doesn't bother me at all, because it's still all one thing.
All one thing, yeah.
God, if God is one, let's take a monotheist bent for a second. And this is something that I often talk about when talking to religious or spiritual people, which I consider myself to be, that when we fall into stories of separation, the kind of habit of the mind which might lead me to believe that I am somehow separate from you, Chris, which is false, right? That anything, if God is one, or if, let's just say reality, if reality is somehow this fluid one thing all happening all at the same time, philosophically, then this God, this creator, this whatever, cannot, by its very definition, give birth to anything which is not also itself. It cannot
be separate,
be whole and one, and then say, oh, I'm going to make this. Now, people might say, God can do whatever God wants. And this is also true. This is also true. This kind of gets at the dimensionality where we talk about, well, what even is free will? And here in this life, experiencing this contrast of this human experience, I feel a kind of freedom calling out to me, calling out to my heart, asking me to feel more of it and the power that it gives me in freedom. And so I like that you, on the one level, you have an interiority, it's sometimes described as, an interiority to everything, that everything is kind of exists of itself. It's kind of autopoetic, or poetic is one of its, it's self-created. Everything is reality. It's emergent. It emerges from itself.
From itself. Exactly.
And yet, so it has its own kind of, not just interiority, but some kind of individuality too. It's somehow expressed like in some way against the rest of the world. Yet, that's a paradox, because that's not true. That's not true at all.
All right. Yes. Because if you grant, so again, it's not. I don't think free will is the correct term, but will to everything. So the question then is this will? So if this fifth dimension is an expression of this will, is the totality of that will God, essentially? And this is where we get into a situation where is there an answer? I mean, we can look at cultural traditions to see,
and no.
Yeah, exactly. We know that every cultural tradition except for ours in the last 200 years has gradation of spirit, right? There are smaller spirits, bigger spirits, there's gods, there's heroes, there's creator gods, there's gods that are like in the Taoist pantheon, the gods are actually not creator gods. The Tao is what created the universe.
Sure. The
gods are just the managers in a way of creation, and then below that you also have spirits, demons, all that kind of stuff. So there's a hierarchy of spirit, and then beyond that you get into the essentially personified spirit, where now you're beyond individuality. Gods with individualities, it's forces, and then it becomes more and more impersonal until finally you get to the Tao, which is simply the expression of creation.
There was a point in the evolution of religious Taoism, where the Tao was deified as Shangdi. So they did essentially turn the Tao into a person, like they anthropomorphized the Tao as a person. But you're right that the one begets the two, begets the three, begets the 10,000 things, and in that 2 and 3 and everything until the myriad things is included.
In a way, I mean,
various.
What's cool is that it is a mirror image of the natural world. So there's two theories. Either it's this idea of kind of the multi-layered kind of spiritual realm is simply because we looked around and go, oh well, there's trees and there's monkeys and chipmunks and bears and us. So there's a hierarchy of consciousness on in the world that we inhabit. So therefore, there's a hierarchy of consciousness in the spiritual world. So that it could simply be that mirroring is just because this is what we see. But there's a lot of very deep spiritual traditions where these people were not fucking around when, in terms of their meditation and their internal research. Like these are people who, after meditating 10 hours a day for most of their lives.
Did you just say internal research?
Yes. Like
damn, that's good.
Turning the gaze inwards, right? And so
internal research, yes.
Internal research, absolutely. And looking inside and go. So these are not people, and especially since it's several traditions. It's not just like the one group of people saying this. This is something we find in basically every single tradition, that there is this kind of hierarchy of spirit. Right? There's a gradation of spirit, so that the continuum of existence goes from earth to spirit, right? But it's a gradation going from the most material to the most ethereal, right? Very much the tripartite earth, man, and heaven. Like this idea of gradation between from one state to the other, and so just to tie all this in together. So this idea of at least at a minimum, 5-dimensionality gives us an out, gives us a mechanism that explains both kind of in the Western context, in terms of physics, that explains, when particles are entangled, explains, black holes. Instead of breaking the math, if you just do it in 5 dimensions, now the math actually works. So there's a kind of a real kind of Western answer there. If you start thinking, okay, maybe it is about having more than the dimensions that we're aware of right now, so 5 dimensions at least. But then it also means that if we accept this 5-dimensionality, then the explanations that we get about chi, about spirits and all that, are a different way of explaining the same phenomenon. It's a Taoist going, they don't have the language that we have of quantum mechanics, but they're explaining the same thing. So, because now we have either will or information as a component of the universe, as a component for creation.
Information doesn't imply will.
No.
But, I mean, information is...
But that's the medium of will. Like, how is will transmitted? Will is expressed through the information that it contains, right? A will towards something. So you can't have will without information. So will is a way of imprinting information, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? So will and...
It's easy to conceive of everything as being composed of information. We're so mired in computer science metaphors where I can very easily think of the chair that I'm sitting up being made of all the information it requires to make a chair. And this is a lot of what they talk about in... this is an easy kind of read that a lot of philosophers and physicists are moving towards, and even psychologists are moving towards, to try and cohere the implications of quantum mechanics on other fields. That everything is really information, is like information theory or whatever.
But I agree with you. That is a trap. That is imposing again these kind of Western.
It's not the same
ideas.
thing as spirit.
Yes, exactly. Because and that's why I'm saying I'm using will and information. That it's both. It's not just information.
Isn't this funny? We were talking last night about how Schrödinger, the guy who came up with Schrödinger's equation, he wrote "What is life?"
He had a cat.
He had a cat, and it was a zombie cat.
Yes.
Right? Is it dead? Is it alive? And so, Schrödinger's cat implies a certain interpretation of the... I love this. A certain interpretation of the Copenhagen interpretation, which is that, that if you put some poison in the box and you don't know, but you put some food right next to it and whatever, and if the cat eats the food, it's gonna get oofed, and if it doesn't, it's alive. So long as you're not looking at what's in the box, the cat is somehow in a informational superposition. It's in a state of being both dead and alive, which is kind of baloney. So we can get into Bohmian mechanics from there.
No. But do you know that whole point, the whole point of Schrödinger's cat is that it's an insane and ridiculous statement. It's an attack on the Copenhagen.
So that's funny. Funny because people use it as like, oh, isn't this cool that this would be true about,
Yeah.
and to a certain extent, I can conceive of it as being true and not true, because the potential for me to run my car off the road when I'm driving home is always there.
Yeah.
It's always present.
Yeah.
And so I'm existing in a field of information, which is all, that exists all through time and possibility, this fifth dimension of what we might call the freedom to move an object, for something in me to somehow move an object through time and space in this direction or that direction.
But I don't know where we are at this point.
I know what I want to say something.
Yes, go for it. Go ahead.
Well, I want to say, when I say it's different than I didn't finish my point about Schrodinger, but that's okay.
Go ahead. Finish.
Well, just that one of Schopenhauer's books and his major philosophy, thankfully, is contained in the title of his book, which is The World as Will and Representation. The world as will and representation. And then Nietzsche picked up on this, called it the will to, he called it the will to, I think the will to, maybe just the will, and then I'm not sure, and then Nietzsche called it the will to power, and then you have other people calling it, what was the guy, the logotherapy, guy who wrote the logotherapy book, calling it the will to meaning. So these different things and I like that. I like that because, right, so anyway, Schopenhauer was influenced by Vedic philosophy, which has a very non-dual understanding of the consciousness that's trying to arise through us. And then Schopenhauer influenced Schrodinger, the physicist who did all that, and then is apparently making this like statement about the absurdity, you're saying, of the Copenhagen interpretation.
Because in a way, again, will comes in and solves the equation, because the cat is not both alive and well and dead, because it also it's like, because part of the irony of like putting the cat in the box and going, well, until we look at the cat, it's both alive and dead. It's like, that's saying that the cat has no will, has no part in this game, but it does, because
what about the bacteria floating on the little mote of dust in the air in the box?
Exactly.
If consciousness is
your consciousness is
everywhere. What about the consciousness of the box itself?
Exactly. So a choice is being made every moment of creation, right? And I think there was this Buddhist monk who like let it slip that right, the universe is actually being created and destroyed every single moment. So the moment is, the universe is here, and then it is destroyed, and then it's recreated, and then it's destroyed every single moment. And what connects the two moments is will, essentially, where basically there's a vote that is made by every single particle in the universe, going, where are we going now, and based on where they were and who's next to them, that's what recreates the universe in its entirety.
I love that.
So
It gives me both a sense of great freedom and responsibility simultaneously in a manifestational sense. Like, what's the reality that I'm creating if I'm somehow the observer of this mysterious process going on? Like,
not just the observer, but a participant.
Very much so. Who is it that's looking through my eyes? And what power is endowed in me when I took this first breath and animated my channels, and now I'm somehow here and people call me Connor? What the hell's going on?
And I think that's the great irony right now, is that we're all unconscious participants. We are members of a democracy, but we don't know that we're voting. And so we're voting blind, because we're not going, wait a minute.
Damn, that's beautiful,
right? So,
I love that. Yeah. I love again, the power and the freedom, both of those simultaneously. See, with great power comes great responsibility, blah blah blah. But it also, I like to tell people when I have these kinds of conversations, I say, look, Chris, the whole universe would not exist without you, buddy.
That's right, and I agree with that.
Yes. Yes.
No, but the thing is, and this is where people get lost sometimes, is that it's not just us, because we are in an animist universe, which means everything else. The trees also have a vote. The chipmunks have a
Absolutely.
vote. Everything, the stars
And
have a
they
vote.
have will. They have a
And
will
they have
to
a
live.
will.
They have a- That's why they exist.
Yeah. So, which is why we don't have infinite power. We can't just kind of will, if this is true, then if I will something strong enough, it will happen. Well, maybe. But if the world around you is saying, no, not really, we don't really want to make this happen, then it's not going to happen.
Amen.
Right? So,
But what does, and I love this because it gets into the domain of the power of manifestation and magic.
Yep.
And all those kinds of things. And so does it matter the words to the incantation, or does it matter how you feel when you're doing it? So what is it that's coming through? Is that possibly what the feeling of the will to exist is in you? Because there's something that's motivating that. And yes, it can happen in shadow. And yes, you can do some crazy shit and manifest things in shadow, and you'll see the results. But I might posit that this is not your reason for being here. This does not accord vibrationally. This does not resonate with your essence, this singularity, so to speak, that's at the core of your being. So the heart in Chinese medicine and in Taoist alchemy and all that, right? Is it says that the heart's true nature essentially is quiescence, is stillness, and so this, according to like Nassim Haramein's theories about the fact that it takes any singularity for any field to exist in the first place, and that he equates the proton at the center of every atom with a black hole. And so, in other words, you go through the event horizon and you pass into this space where all information is compressed into one thing. You go in through this wormhole into essentially what do we want to call it? The Akashic Records. You go into this space where all information is contained, and that space is what's literally informing the creation of reality itself. Nassim Haramein says that that reality is actually the white hole radiation that's escaping the event horizon of the black hole that's at the center of every possible point in space. It also says in Taoist alchemy, that's why I love the overlap between Taoist alchemical theory and specifically Nassim Haramein's his physics, his sort of philosophy, is that Liu Yiming, what is that, 18th century Taoist alchemist philosopher, said that the one opening of the mysterious female, which is referred to in the Tao Te Ching, and it's this kind of unification of yin and yang, the mysterious female, this kind of yang yin fusion. This is the one opening of the mysterious female. It has no position, no form, no shape, no image, right? But yet there's all this other Taoist alchemical theory about where does it exist in the body? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Is it a little bit to the rear? Is it a little bit anterior to that? No, he's like, it's everywhere and it's nowhere. And so what is that other than the peephole through which spirit itself is whispering to you? It's the still small voice of the heart. It is yes.
But and behind that peephole is actually a unified will.
Absolutely.
So, and because that's the connection.
The monad,
that's what allows everything to be connected, is because through each of these points is actually a connection to the totality. But I want to go back to because I do think that this is where Taoist alchemy and all this and the relationship of the heart to the flow of qi is actually a key to understanding how all this works. But one of the things I want to go back to is this idea of will, and everything has a will. There is in the tarot cards that designed by Aleister Crowley, the card strength was changed to lust because it's about desire. And I think this is where we go from will as something which is in the brain to desire which is more in the heart. Right? It's
So-
less cerebral. It's not the will to something. Like I'm not going to manifest something because I'm thinking about it. I'm going to manifest it because I desire it.
Yes. So
Right.
yeah.
And because desire is something that you can find throughout the living world. Like a tree desires
Absolutely.
sunlight, desires water. So desire, right, is actually
That's a whole can of worms. And a can of worms I'm particularly impassioned about lately, is this difference between. So it's interesting. So Aleister Crowley, God rest his soul, a little bit of a freak,
just a bit.
and nothing wrong with being a freak. We're all freaks. Let's be freaks, okay? But, you know shadow when you encounter it. You do what thou wilt.
Yeah.
And love is the law. This sounds great in theory, and I am all for freedom. I'm all for freedom, actually. I mean, full stop.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
But in the higher orders of Thelema, there were teachings that contradicted that very premise.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But here's what's interesting: lust is not the same thing as the freedom that you feel when you know what your heart is asking you to desire to bring into manifestation.
That's why desire is a better word than lust. Lust has too many connotations.
Let's be clear. So, lust is a sin.
Yes.
Because lust is founded on I'm going to satisfy something which may be totally natural and even innocent. Even innocent, the desire to have the thing satisfied.
Yeah.
Can be entirely innocent and all that. But it's the degree to which you see the thing that is capable of meeting that desire for you as separate from you.
Yes.
So this is the definition of lust. Sin means without. It means without knowing and accepting and acting from a place of your own innate inherent divinity.
Yes, which is why desire is a better word than lust. But I think what's important is to recognize that essentially the greatest magician of the 19th and 20th century pinpointed as
strength and lust.
That essentially desire is the motivating force throughout the universe. That is what changes and shapes reality. Right?
Yes.
So that's what brings us back to Taoist chemical work,